Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the workshop. Beautiful Madison, Wisconsin, where it's sunny and 15 degrees below zero. That's Fahrenheit. For those of you in Celsius, that's like minus 25. So, okay, so my material this morning is to talk about adding scale economies and imperfect competition to general equilibrium, and then actually do one with horizontal multinational firms if time permits. A little background on this. In the 70s and 80s, particularly the 70s, when CG modeling started, and they were using fixed point algorithms. Only very simple models could be solved. By simple, I don't mean the number of dimensions. You could have lots of sectors and countries, but really severe assumptions were needed for those algorithms to work. And I may have mentioned this the other day, but at the end of the 70s, there were, the joke was, I did mention this, the joke was that the answer to any question from a CG model is 1.5% of GDP. And Tom suggests maybe it was 0.5% of GDP, the Harvard effect. And so, it was kind of disappointing and frustrating. Economists naturally wanted bigger numbers for liberalization or removing some types of distortion, and the models just weren't delivering. They needed really constant returns to scale and perfect competition in all sectors, and in addition, there were sort of patches like what we call the Armington assumption, which is an assumption that goods are differentiated at the national level. And what the Armington assumption does is basically help ensure an interior solution to comparative statics problems. You didn't go up into a corner. The software would have had a lot of trouble with that. I think Genpact still has a lot of trouble with that. They can do it, if you have many things that can go to zero or not. I just don't see how they can do that with that approach. So one important development in the late 80s was I was working with other Canadian economists trying to create some background material for a Royal Commission, which eventually morphed into the US-Canada Free Trade Agreement. And this was a major departure from traditional Canadian policies, which were pretty protectionist, particularly from the manufacturing sector. And one person who was very influential was Rick Harris, who was at Queen's University at the time, says, well, this is the perfect competition and constant returns to scale are ridiculous assumptions for the Canadian economy, the size of it. So Rick was the first, really a pioneer. He spent several years of his life, I think, trying to do a CG model. Well, not just trying, he succeeded in doing a CG model that had scale economies and imperfect competition in it. And lo and behold, you do a liberalization and the effects are dramatically larger by an order of magnitude. So this kind of really turned the corner. We felt that a lot of these really small numbers were actually sort of inevitable from the modeling framework that was being used. So I want to talk, we made progress since then, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to kind of use some off-the-shelf theory so that that's not completely new. And hopefully that helps us make a little progress, and then you see how this is coded. I'm first going to do what's called large group monopolistic competition, and then I'm going to do small group monopolistic competition where markups are endogenous. So you get pro-competitive effects, not just variety effects. And then depending where we are, I can go through a multinational model, but it looks a little complicated when you first see it. Okay, so most of you have heard the phrase, the Dixit-Stiglitz CES preferences. Their original paper was much broader than what is now just called Dixit-Stiglitz preferences, but basically these are CES preferences with an elasticity of substitution across goods greater than 1. It has to be greater than 1 because you're going to endogenize the number of goods that are actually produced. If preferences were Cobb-Douglas, isoquants never, indifference curves never touch the axes. So if you don't have any of a good, the price goes off to infinity and utility goes to 0. Okay, unless you consume some of everything, your utility is 0. So this elasticity substitution greater than 1 kind of binds you away from that awkward situation so that you can actually endogenize the number of goods that are produced in the model. Okay, this will be a 2-sector model like yesterday, but a lot of differences. Y will be a competitive constant returns industry. Well, X will consist of an endogenous number of differentiated varieties. Utility of the representative consumer is Cobb-Douglas at the upper level between X and Y. So we're going to have income effects here. And the symmetry of varieties within a group allows us to write utility as follows. So XC is like a composite commodity, but it's actually an utility. It's not just linear in the amount of stuff that's produced, and I'll come back to that. So at the upper level, utility is a function of this X composite and Y, that those are Cobb-Douglas substitutes. And X then is the sum. The number of varieties is actually going to be continuous in the model. I really should be using integral signs, but hey, sorry about that. So X is a CES function where alpha is between 0 and 1. So the difference between sort of conventional analysis and monopolistic competition is that the number of varieties is endogenous. Okay, this function permits what we used to call 2-stage budgeting. I guess we still do. And you can think of the consumer as first allocating total income between the Y and the X sectors. Did a little bit of this on Monday. Let E denote the minimum cost of buying 1 unit of X. So it's the expenditure function at a price P for the individual varieties. Good Y is the numeraire. And so this first stage budgeting yields the following, this very standard Cobb-Douglas result. The price of Y is 1, so Y demand is just 1 minus beta times income. And X is beta times income divided by the price index for the composite commodity. E is the price of 1 unit of XC. XC is really in utility units. Okay, so E is the minimum cost. So E is derived from minimizing the cost of buying 1 unit of the composite commodity. So I just let mx equal beta m, so just a little less notation. So xm is this expenditure on x in aggregate. You solve for the demand for a single x variety, so variety E, you get the following. And the algebra, by the way, is in the original mailing to you from me or through Martha was there was a file called pre-course notes and math review. So if you want to see all the intermediate steps, we were talking about this last night. All the 14 intermediate steps, you can find them in that PDF file. Okay, so this is the demand for an individual X variety. Sigma, if you work through the algebra, is equal to 1 over 1 minus alpha. So alpha is between 0 and 1, so sigma is greater than 1. Or you can invert that and say alpha is sigma minus 1 over sigma. The expenditure function, the cost of buying 1 unit of this utility good, XC, is given in the next line. And that has the same functional form as the utility, the formula for XC itself. This is sometimes we call this, say that the CS functions are self-dual. So the primal, which is the utility function, and the dual, which is the expenditure function, have the same look to them, although the exponents are not the same. So just to make a point, I think many people have been through this, but suppose all prices are equal. So then you're just looking at n times the sum of n times one price, the price of all of them, to the sigma minus 1, and then 1 over 1 minus sigma. So you could write that on the right-hand side is E equals N 1 over 1 minus sigma times P. So the price index, the cost of buying a unit of this utility composite is falling with the number of varieties. Okay. You don't need as much physical stuff to give you the same utility. So an apple and an orange give you more utility than 2 apples or 2 oranges. Okay. This is why this is often referred to as love of variety, for that expression, because there's other kinds of product differentiation. Okay, so you can then write X in the bottom line. On the left there, Xi equals P to the minus sigma, e to the sigma minus 1 mx, because from the definition of E, that reconciles with the first line of the thing. Notice you can always do little checks on algebra in micro. This expression for X, if you multiply both sides of the equation by P and divide by MX, on the left-hand side, you have the share of expenditure on good I, and you'd have P to the 1 minus sigma times E to the sigma minus 1. And note that that's homogeneous if you double all prices
and income,
sorry, then nothing changes. So there should be that homogeneity property of that function. Okay. So what follows is, how are we going to get, what does imperfect competition look like in this model? Well, first of all, it's assumed that the individual firms are small enough that they take M as fixed. If there's then an even stronger assumption that is very nice helpful for getting analytical results, something we talked about yesterday, which is that modelers very typically assume that the number of varieties is very large, so that when you change your own price, there's imperceptible change in E. Your own price is in the expenditure function E, but if it's one of 1,000 prices, the effect of your own price on E is assumed to go to zero. It's sort of like a quasi-perfect competition assumption. Right? You can't, if the individual firm ignores any effect it has on the price index E, and in that case, there's just a constant elasticity of demand for each good, which is going to be minus sigma. And that is referred to as the large group monopolistic competition assumption. And it's just, it means markups are not going to be variables. So if you want a pencil and paper solution, you can get one. Okay. I also have some notes deriving, I don't think I sent them. It's called the Bertrand-Cournot algebra that took me a day at least to work out. But if you look at the demand, elasticity of demand for an individual variety in this model, you can get these two formulas. The top one is for Cournot competition. So a firm chooses its price assuming other firms' quantities are constant. And the Bertrand assumption is you change your price assuming other firms' prices are constant. Okay. Almost all of monopolistic competition doesn't even realize they're doing this, but they use the Bertrand assumption. Although with infinite numbers of firms, it turns out that won't really matter. Okay, so look at eta C, the first equation on the page. On the right-hand side, you can see that as S goes to zero, so there's more and more variety. So the market share, S is the market share of this representative firm. So as S goes to zero, there's just lots of varieties. Yours is one of 1,000. As S goes to zero, eta C converges to just sigma. That's another way of thinking about the large group monopolistic competition assumption. Okay. The elasticity of demand for your good is constant. The formula for Bertrand competition has the same limiting case. As S goes to zero, again, the price elasticity converges to the elasticity of substitution among the varieties. So at S equals zero, these things are the same. And so I guess people don't really think about themselves making an explicit assumption. It's also the case that if you went to monopoly, if S goes to one, so only one firm has the whole market, then elasticity of demand goes to one as well. And that's a problem because if elasticity of demand for your good is one, you'd want to produce infinitely little at an infinitely high price. Because no matter what how much you produce, the revenue is the same. P times X is the same. So how do you maximize profits?
Just make it
Actually
tiny.
make X really small because that's costly. So the price, so there's no solution in that case. For intermediate values, suppose there's 5 firms, then Cornell is less elastic. I won't try to show that on the slide, less elastic than Bertrand. So for small numbers of firms, the Cornell markup is going to be larger than the Bertrand markup. And I'll show how the markup relates to the elasticities in a minute. As the good goes to, if the goods go toward being perfect substitutes, that's when sigma equals infinity. So it's a homogeneous good. Then the Cornell markup, Cornell still works. The Cornell markup is 1 over the firm's market share. But the Bertrand markup goes to infinity, which is perfect competition. Okay. So with scale economies, that's going to be a problem. All right. So from perceived elasticities of demand to markups, suppose the demand for good X is just written in inverse form. P is a function of X. So the monopolist revenue, or doesn't have to be a monopolist, sorry, is P of X times X. And although note that this function P of X is defined differently for Cornell and Bertrand. For Cornell, it's how a firm's price responds to its own output, holding other firms' outputs constant. For Bertrand, it's how a firm's price responds to its own output, holding the prices of other firms constant. Income is viewed as constant in both cases. So if you differentiate revenue then with respect to X, that's going to give marginal revenue. And so you get X plus XI DPI dx. And you can multiply and divide that second term by P over P. Then you can factor that out, and you can, this is an expression for marginal revenue. It's P times 1 minus 1 over the elasticity of demand. So note again that converges to perfect competition as eta goes off to infinity, and then 1 over eta goes to 0. This eta, this elasticity of demand, is defined differently. The second line just emphasizes this. Eta is I'm going to, for these slides, I'm going to have a convention. Eta, of course, is negative, but rather than carry around negative signs, we're just going to define eta as the positive value. So I put a minus sign out there because the thing in brackets on the second line is negative. Okay, so eta for firm I in the Bertrand case, the formula looks the same, but they're not really. The partial derivatives are different. The way they're defined is different in the two cases. For Bertrand, it's holding other firms' prices constant. For Cornell, it's holding other firms' output constant. Okay. Anyway, then the last line, we can just write that as marginal revenue, which is the price of good I times 1 minus what we'll call the markup. The markup is simply 1 over the elasticity of demand. The firm's perceived elasticity, not the market elasticity. Okay, often if you read monopolistic competition papers, they move it over to the other side. And this is just a quick comment. So instead of P times 1 minus 1 over eta, it becomes P times eta over eta minus 1 marginal cost. Those are the same thing. So sometimes we call the right-hand equation the net basis, and the left one the gross basis.
So we have two things. So eta goes to 1, then you get perfect competition, right?
No, you get monopoly.
You get monopoly.
Well,
Because price would equal
No,
marginal
no.
cost then, right?
shouldn't. Yeah, if the market share of an individual firm is 1, that's monopoly. There's only one.
Go actually back to that one slide, the one we were just on. One more. So, okay, let me see this. It equals 1. All right. And then what relation does this have to do, since I did some of this work back in the day, to like the learner index and the learner rule? Does that ring any bells?
Wow. Well, yeah, but I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think if you move that around, you can get his like condition for like markup. But okay,
Okay.
that's fine.
Now, again, this is not the market elasticity demand. This is the firm's perceived elasticity demand, which depends on its market share. So you change the number of firms, you change the perceived elasticity demand, but not the market elasticity demand. The formula does depend on the fact that the upper nest in the utility function is Cobb Douglas. If it's not, the markup formula is a lot more complicated, and we don't want to do that. Okay. Right. So I'm going to start with large group monopolistic competition to show you how to translate this into a GAMS model. This should be familiar to a lot of people that have gone through this. So I deliberately picked it for something that's maybe fairly straightforward. Okay, so the large group assumption is that there are many firms, so individuals view E as constant. The other way of explaining exactly the same constant is this S, this market share of an individual firm is going to 0. So the elasticity of demand for an individual variety is just sigma. Equilibrium in the X sector involves 2 equations and 2 unknowns. The unknowns are X, which is output per variety, and N, the number of varieties per firms. The 2 equations, the first one is the firm's optimization condition, marginal revenue equal marginal cost. And the second one is the free entry or 0 profit condition, that price equals average cost. Okay. Now, this model is characterized by increasing, for example, if the economy expanded, there's increasing variety, and this can be extended, of course, to intermediate goods as well. I have a paper on that. Total income is given by L when the wage is chosen as numeraire. And just be clear about this. One of these things are important. What is being assumed here about preferences? And I've written down 3 assumptions that I think characterize what it is that's going on. I'll call them symmetry 1, 2, and 3. Symmetry 1 is that all X goods are imperfect, but symmetric substitutes. So you don't care if you have 1 apple or 1 orange, but you'd rather have 1 of each than 2 apples or 2 oranges. And so that's the idea. Imperfect substitutes, but symmetric substitutes. Second assumption should say two, there's symmetry two, all goods have the same cost function. And symmetry three is something that's rarely recognized as an assumption, but when you start talking about multinational firms, it's a really bad assumption. And this assumption is that fixed and marginal costs have the same functional form, so that the ratio of fixed cost to marginal cost is a constant. And you'll see where this matters. And that's also very important in simplifying the model to get some analytical solution. But in my multinationals model, I do not use that assumption because one of the motives for a vertical firm is, you keep your skilled labor intensive fixed costs at home, and you produce labor intensive marginal costs are located abroad. Okay, so that's then the bottom is the utility function. Again, sigma is 1/1 minus alpha. The budget constraint is the number of varieties times the price of a representative variety times the output of a representative variety plus PY times Y. So there's no profits in the model. The free entry assumption assures that those are not present. Okay, so we sort of went through this already. You see the CES demand function there for XI, and the total amount of stuff bought N times X is beta L over PX. Okay, so the rest of it I've kind of gone through. The large group assumption is that while your own price is in the summation, it's in the expenditure function E, you just ignore any effect you have on that because there are so many varieties that just not responsive to your own price. Okay, so what are some of the conditions of the model then? Well, in the large group case, the marginal revenue expression is quite simple. It's PX times 1 minus 1 over sigma, where sigma is a parameter. It doesn't vary, and that equals marginal cost. So that's a pricing equation, marginal cost greater than or equal to P times 1 minus 1 over sigma. The complementary variable for that is X. Secondly, there's a free entry equation that's complementary with N, the number of varieties there. And I guess I've kind of taken a shortcut here that maybe I shouldn't have done on the slide. But in this model, a simple way of writing the free entry condition is that a firm's markup revenues have to just cover the fixed costs. Maybe I don't need to go do some algebra. It takes 2 lines of algebra to show that. So as the markup, so the markup has to be high enough times output so that markup revenues cover fixed costs.
Okay, and I think this slide cleared me up. So as sigma in this case goes to infinity,
Yes.
that converges to perfect competition.
Correct.
Because then you get a perfectly elastic.
Correct.
Okay, that's where I was getting flipped. And then the other extreme is when it's equal to 1, right? And that's monopoly, even though they can't really have that. Like 0.99.
Yeah, that contradicts the idea of
Yeah.
large group monopolistic competition. No, yeah, okay, so.
That's all right.
Yeah.
It's all right. I just,
No,
This-
no, that's fair. So if there's only. Yeah. You're going to Cobb Douglas, and again, in Cobb Douglas, if you were a monopolist, you want to produce infinitely little at an infinitely high price. Just minimize your cost, because no matter how much you produce, you get the same revenue.
I see, yeah.
Okay.
But really the markup just has to do with what the elasticity, the price is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. Just going back to
Okay,
some IO.
some other equations, the model, then demand and supply for Y, demand and supply for X. I'm just, to keep it simple, I just have a one factor economy, labor. So the supply demand for Y is greater than or equal to the demand for Y on the right-hand side. That formula comes from the Cobb-Douglas assumption in the upper nest. Demand and supply for X varieties, the total amount of stuff produced is beta is 1 minus beta minus L over PX. And then the supply and demand for labor is the demand comes from the Y sector. It comes from the X sector when it's used for marginal costs, and from the X sector when it's used for fixed costs. So the left-hand side has 3 sources of demand for labor. Equation 9. Okay, well, this model is actually simple enough. You can get an analytical solution to it. You can use 4 and 5 from the previous page to solve for X and Y. And these solution values can be used to get the following. Okay, so in the bottom of the page, it shows what the output of a representative variety is. It's sigma minus 1 fixed cost over marginal cost. And here's where this third assumption, what I call the third symmetry assumption, comes in. If f of x and mcx have the same functional form, it's actually trivial here because there's only one factor. But if they have the same functional form, that ratio is going to be constant. It will not depend on factor prices. So the output of any variety that is produced is the same amount as any other variety. And it's constant. That's what I should say. The number of varieties, and the second equation at the bottom in 10 is the number of varieties produced. And what you can see from that is that it's linear in the size of the economy. So if you double the size of the economy, exactly double the number of varieties with the output of each variety held constant. Okay. So you start out getting 1 apple and the economy grows, and now you have 1 apple and 1 orange. And then it grows a little more. You have 1 apple, 1 orange, and 1 banana, and so forth. It's all through this variety effect in large group monopolistic competition. That's 100% of your welfare effect. Okay, I think this is just a little slot. This is simply trying to show that as you expand the size of the economy, per capita income increases with the size of the economy, because utility is n raised to the power of something greater than 1. So if you double the size of the economy, you more than double utility. You exactly double n, but that has the utility value that more than doubles. So bigger is better. And if you had 2 very symmetric economies, suppose you had 2 monopolistic companies, you have 2 absolutely identical economies, and you open up trade between them, that increases welfare. Because you buy half of each of their varieties and they buy half of each of your varieties. You have twice as many, half as much of each of twice as many varieties, and that's better when these things are imperfect substitutes. Okay, so here's one of the little data matrix that is balanced that I talked about the other day. Yeah, yesterday. Seems like a long time ago. Though I am having fun. So the markets, I don't know why I call that C, but C is this X sector. Fixed costs, think of that as a production sector. This is a framework that I came up with way back at the end of the 80s when I first met Tom, and I told him what I wanted to do, and he was very helpful on this. We treat fixed costs, so it's like building factories, okay? It takes resources and it's a produced good. The Y sector is very simple, 100 units of output from 100 units of labor input. In the benchmark, consumption of X goods are 100, these are values, remember, and 100 units of Y gets 200 units of utility. Consumer sells 200 units of labor to the market and receives and uses the receipts 200 to purchase utility.
Mhm.
Okay. That can be a little hard to get your head around. Now, how do we model free entry? This is what, puzzled me for a bit way back when I started this in the late 80s. And the way I figured out was actually quite simple. There is, you don't actually have to do it this way, but I think it's much more transparent. There's another agent in the model called entrepreneur. And entrepreneur isn't interested in, it's kind of a dummy agent to make this work. What happens is that markup revenues in the economy are paid to the entrepreneur. So the last line in this little matrix is minus 20, the markup revenues become the income of the entrepreneur. But this dummy agent doesn't want to buy goods. This dummy agent wants to buy fixed costs. So this is a way of getting markup revenues to exactly equal fixed costs, which is a free entry assumption. So if the economy expands, the markup revenues is going to expand. Entrepreneur's income is going to expand. He's going to expand his demand for fixed cost, which is entry. N goes up. Is that reasonably clear? Okay. Where are we? So, there's the formula for this slide is kind of in the wrong place. Just to show you that free entry assumption can be written as price equals average cost, but a slightly simpler formulation is to just say markup revenues equal fixed costs, so which is the assumption I use in the model. Okay. This again seems a little redundant. Basically, again, if you double the size of the economy, per capita income rises. There's twice as many people, but sort of increasing returns to the number of rivals, if you want to put it that way. Okay, I think I'll go to the code. Anyone have a question? I never know when there's no questions, if that means I'm going too slow or that people are completely lost. There's no response has an identification issue. Okay. So here's the simple model with just one factor of production. Keeps it quite simple. Elasticity substitution among varieties is 5. The fixed cost of A new variety is 20, and the endowment of labor is 200. There are 4 quantity variables in the model: X, N, the number of firms or varieties, Y, and W. And then 5 prices: PX, PE, the price index. I'm using that. You could eliminate that, but I like to see it because it has, of course, an economic interpretation. The price of fixed costs, the price of Y, and then PW is the consumer price index that we've used before, price of labor and income. Okay. So again, what's really driving this model, this free entry assumption, again, is a trick that ensures free entry and zero profits. Again, the trick is that we have an agent called entrepreneur who receives the markup revenues and demands fixed costs. That been substituted out of the equation. Okay, so I guess, sorry about this, not quite consistent. Instead of actually having the entrepreneur receiving markup revenues and demanding fixed costs, what I've done is just substitute in. So this equation says the production of fixed costs, which is the parameter FC times the variable N. So that's the total demand supply of fixed costs. And then the right-hand side is markup revenues. So that's the condition for that imposes free entry on the market. And then so this, and then you check the benchmark to make sure it's okay. Again, we have this iter limit equals 0 thing, which is very useful when you do make a mistake and don't know where it is. And then set the iter limit of 1,000, or you can set it at 10,000, whatever you like. Solve it again. And then first experiment was just double the size of the economy, see what happens. And then there's a loop over the size of the economy to trace out the path of per capita income as the labor supply of the economy doubles. Sorry, as it increases slowly. So let me run that model. This was Madison 6. We should have that, I hope.
Hey, there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, but come on, do you see it?
No, I don't see it. I just
Okay.
know
yes.
that it's there.
It's Martin Johnson, a question. What's the advantage of this specification compared with solving iteratively until fixed costs are not covered?
This solves it in one shot, I guess, is the main thing, right? You write the model down.
Yeah.
There's this tendency, this is always a challenge when we teach modeling classes in applied economics, is that folks who come from a scripting sort of a Python engineering paradigm, they find it uncomfortable that economists want to write down, show us the equations that this model represents, write down the model. And you have to be very precise, whereas they tend to think about sort of procedural methods to describe an equilibrium. Well, I do this, and then I do that, and then I do this, and I do that, and when it stops, I'm there. And so it's very helpful. We find it useful to actually just write down the model and solve it in one shot and not have to do things iteratively. I guess that's...
Yeah. Can you just read that again, Martha?
What's the advantage of this specification compared with solving iteratively until fixed costs are not covered?
Okay, not really sure.
So his alternative is solving iteratively.
I guess, Martin, do you want to maybe clarify or?
Sure. So you could start out and just say, suppose there are 20 firms, compute the equilibrium, check and see whether or not you've got enough rent, I'll call it, that you could have actually afforded and another competitor. And if you can, then you solve it again with if I said 20, you solve it with 21, and you just keep on going until you can't afford, or you either get negative, you get rents less than fixed costs, or either less, you get rents less than fixed cost to support another competitor.
I guess you could do that, but if you go to just the next level of model complication, suppose you have two countries, then you have two firm numbers to have to solve. So you have to do a two-dimensional grid search, essentially. Instead of a single iteration over one variable n, you have to find, you change n1, then n2 may now be out of.
It's often the case, though, that you will have that this will be a cobweb and it will converge, right? That's often the case. You can think of iterative ways to solve things. And that's usually, we regard that as sort of a last resort. That's not the first. First, you want to get the model declared. So here are the equations of the equilibrium. And then there can be circumstances where it's convenient to be able to do an iterative method for solving it. If you have many households, like if you have a model that has, you may want to save dimensionality by doing an iterative approach for doing it, but that's something that usually is specialized. When you run into trouble, then you do that. Whereas if you're just trying to lay out the canonical model that captures the idea, it's better to just, we feel it's better to write down, this is the equilibrium, here are the equations that we want to solve.
Yeah. Well, I add that I think it would become clear as you've got more of these variables that you have to iterate over. If you get 3 of them, then, I have multinational firm models where there's 6 possible firm types. And, some kind of iterative procedure would be very, very awkward. Okay, well, thanks for the comment, though. So on my screen now are the results iterating over the size of the economy. So the benchmark was down here at 1. Okay, and you'll see as the size of the economy grows, welfare goes up more than in proportional. So the third column is welfare per capita. So I'm just assuming the number of people is the same as the number of workers. There's no productivity improvement. We're just adding bodies. But there is a per capita welfare gain due to this variety effect. The varieties increase strictly in proportion to the size of the economy. We showed that analytically. This model actually has an analytical solution. It's simple enough. But that has a sort of increasing returns effect on utility. The markup is constant. The puzzle column.
So the number of firms are increasing over there in that column?
Yeah.
So you can have 1.2 firms?
Sure.
I see.
The number of firms is a continuous variable.
Okay.
Yes, I probably should note that as another range assumption. It's, having discrete numbers of firms would be a really tough computational problem. So the way I've explained this to classes is, okay, a fixed number of firms is easy. A continuum of firms is easy, but a discrete but endogenous number of firms is hard.
It's hard.
Because then it becomes like an integer programming problem.
I see, but I guess one way you just get around that is you just look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right?
You can enumerate things. I mean, there's,
Yeah.
yeah, you can enumerate. It becomes very specialized, and it's sort of like, reminds me a little bit in game theory, as the numbers get small, it gets harder and harder to tie down exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think that having a continuous number has the advantage that you get the essential qualitative properties without having to.
Yeah, I see what you mean by that. Yeah, you get to see the like more than proportional growth of welfare and all that.
And again, it's similar to the other comment. If my multinational model with 6 firm types, there's 2 countries. The firms in each country can be vertical, horizontal, or domestic.
Fantastic, yeah.
And so you would find that very, very awkward to treat as an integer programming problem,
yeah.
to try to find out the number of firms.
Okay, no, that all makes sense, what we both said. I'm fine, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay.
I understand. So what is, okay, welfare, well cap is welfare over the size. All right. Does anybody have any other questions on this? Because I know this is like one of the things that, people want to see is like seeing these results and then being able to interpret them for some takeaway rather than necessarily the underlying code. Clearly Martin's involved or interested in the code, but I assume there's nothing in the chat. Okay.
Okay. So this large group monopolistic competition assumption has been used over and over and over again in the international trade literature, and also new economic geography. And the attractiveness of it is that it simplifies the model considerably, and allows in many cases a full analytical solution to modeling. We still like being able to get analytical solutions, but if you insist on getting an analytical solution, you sacrifice a lot of realism and a lot of interesting stuff in mind. And that's partly why I started using simulation as a theory tool, which is my research agenda. So I want to go through the same model, but with without the large group assumption, and I'm going to do it both for Bertrand and Corno. So the file calibrates the data to the Bertrand markup rule and solves the model, and then the markup rule is changed to Corno. Let's see what the difference is. No change in the elasticity of substitution. So the Corno case is not recalibrated to yield the same benchmark. There's another way of doing this. I think I'll mention. Switching to the Corno formula raises the initial markup and number of firms and lowers welfare sum. So Corno is, I guess we could say, less competitive in this case than Bertrand. I've asked IO economists if that's in any sense a general result, and they say either no, or I don't know, or I've never thought about it. But in this monopolistic competition with constant marginal cost and the CES demand, it's fairly robust result that you switch, firms suddenly wake up in the morning and become Corno competitors instead of Bertrand. The price is going to go up, the markup's going to go up, and welfare is going to go down. Increasing the size of the economy increases welfare in both cases, but now it's a combination of increased variety and lower markups. If you went back to those markup formulas, the S is going down as we increase the market share, and that is raising sorry, that is lowering the markup. Okay, to calibrate to the same data as the previous example, large group monopolistic competition, to sort of offset having n or 1 over n in the markup equation, to calibrate it to the same 20% value for the markup. I had changed the elasticity substitution among the goods from 5 to 6 and whatever that is, 6 and 6.5. Okay, 6.333. Repeating decimal here. So if you put that in to the next line, markup equals, you would get the 20%. 20.2 is the markup. So in this model, I'm going to specify 2 equations. Rather, I don't need a separate file, since the only change in the model between Corno and Bertrand is the formula for the markup. Nothing else in the model really needs to be changed. What I do is add a variable to the model, which is the markup. Instead of saying price times 1 minus 1 over S is marginal revenue, it's now price times 1 minus markup is marginal revenue, where markup is an endogenous variable. So we add one variable to the model, markup, but we want to look and compare 2 cases for that, which are the Corno and the Bertrand case. So we're going to have 2 equations for that added variable, but we'll only use one at a time, obviously. So that's the Bertrand markup formula from earlier in the slides, and then the Corno markup there. So what I can do now is declare there's 2 different models. Model, I don't know where M75 comes from, but B is for Bertrand, and that uses the markup. The added equation from the previous thing is markup B, and the complementary variable is markup. The alternative model is M75C for Corno, and there the added equation and variable markup C equation complementary with MC. Like these are like auxiliary equations, is a term we sometimes use. So here's a double loop then. This is a loop over I and J. I is the size of the economy, and so there's code for starting big and going small. You can go either direction. And an endowment is 200 times size. And here's another way, an alternative way of doing something that I did yesterday, whichever is more convenient. This is an if-else statement in GAMS. So it says if the ordinal of the inner loop J is equal to 1, then solve the Bertrand model. Otherwise, there's only 2 variable values. So you can say else solve M75C, which is the Corno case. So this loop was kind of done in the other order from yesterday. It shouldn't matter. So for a given value of the size of the economy, it first solves for the Bertrand equilibrium, and then it solves for the Corno. And then the welfare per cap markups number of firms is just storing up in the loop each of those results, and then this parameter results is putting those things all into one matrix. So for easy display or dumping to Excel or whatever we might want to do. All right, so let me go to the GMS file for that. That is Madison 7. And I open that in a new group.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that model solved. Okay. All right, so here's the results with an endogenous competition and endogenous markup. You can kind of see that was the benchmark for the Bertrand case. And if the firms wake up in the morning and say, "Oh no, we're going to play Cournot now, everybody." What happens is the markup goes up from 0.2 to 0.299, 0.3.
Yeah.
There's quite a jump there. The number of firms goes up. That might sound counterintuitive, but it's not. They're getting more firms, but they're less efficient. They're up the average cost curve. The title of one of my papers.
A great one. Was that with Ig? That was a great paper. Was with Ig Horseman, right?
Yeah, that was with the enforcement. There's a story about that. You know, the original title on the paper as submitted to the Journal of International Economics was "Up Your Average Cost Curve." And it was specifically aimed at Brander and Spencer, but the editor made us change the title. It's still kind of a nice title. Bertrand is a little more competitive in this case than Cournot, but firm scale also matters. That isn't actually picked up. Along with the increase in varieties, you see the markups are going down. So the firm's output is going up. So the output per firm is going up, which means you're going down the average cost curve. So now welfare gains are a combination of two different things. This same variety effect is there on the consumption side, but there's also a production efficiency effect coming from the production side of the model. So it's a combination of both of those things are contributing to the increase in welfare. The per capita income effect is actually the difference is quite small as you go up to a large economy. Now, there's another way of doing this, and I think when Tom and I were teaching in Kiev in August, I talked about this. So let me just say briefly that you could, instead of just switching from Bertrand to Cournot, holding other parameters constant, you could recalibrate the model so that the Bertrand case also yielded a value of 1. Okay. And you could do that in this model by you increase the elasticity of substitution. So if you go from the Bertrand formula to the Cournot formula, and you still want the Cournot formula to equal 0.2, you can change. You could change the elasticity of substitution. And then you would replicate the same benchmark and you can see what happens there. And, I think a lot of modelers do this, and I'm just going to give a caveat that you have to be very careful about interpreting results when you do that, because you've changed preferences. Okay, it's not the same utility function anymore. And compare the welfare levels is subject to serious misinterpretation, I think. So that's possible. And I think people do that. When you change to an alternative assumption, you have to get calibrate to the same benchmark, you have to change something else. You have to change the second thing to compensate for the first thing that you changed. But then if it's changes in preferences or technology, you're not in the same model.
So what do we adjust? The elasticity of substitution, you said?
Yeah. So going back to the slides, way back there somewhere. So going back to slide number 4. So suppose that Bertrand formula is,
I'm sorry, I have another question here from the chat.
okay,
To check that I'm following you, did you test if there was no incentive to switch to
Bertrand, respective to Cornell?
if the others were playing C respective B?
yes.
Okay. Did you check if there was no incentive to
I think there's
B?
some abbreviation,
Okay.
so it will be easier. If I write this.
Okay,
Meanwhile, I'm gonna try to do this.
oh, no, okay, now I understand. That's a really interesting
problem.
question, actually. I don't know how a game theory person would answer that. So if everyone else is playing Cornell, should you play Bertrand?
Yeah,
Wow, I really do not know. The whole notion of Nash, whether you like it or not, and in some ways it's flawed, is that you're making a best response to whatever everyone else is doing. So if you're going to have a firm now calculating, well, if I decide to play by another rule, that's the same as saying, well, can I benefit by changing my output? In the Nash paradigm, the answer would be no. But if you're endogenizing how other firms are going to respond to your change, you've left the world of Nash. That's about the best answer I can give. And that's not to say Nash is the only way of doing these problems. That's about the best I can do. I don't know how a game theory or IO guy would answer this question. Okay, so sorry, I was back on slide 4. So this the recalibration. Suppose that A to B, the elasticity of demand under Bertrand equals 0.2 for a given number of firms, and the elasticity of substitution of 6.333. Then to get the same to get that same value of 0.2 generated under the Corno competition, you're going to need to change signal. Or fixed cost or marginal cost or something else that compensates for that.
Can you just do that quick? Just try something. I can't get this to do anything. What would you do to do that?
I'd set these two equal to one another.
Well, I'm saying in your code.
Oh. In the code.
Yeah. There's something you could alter. I mean, I'm trying things, but
Yeah, I had that. I did that for. I have that. Maybe can pull that up later because I did this in Kiev where we had a longer session going on.
okay, that's all right.
There is a way of doing that. But I'd have to search. Let me maybe not do that right now. We're going to have a break soon.
Yeah.
So very soon.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So that's just the Excel sheet that I dumped to, showing the same thing that we had. Yeah, I'll look for that. But again, is my caveat kind of clear? You got to be a little. If you recalibrate to another assumption, then you compensate by changing something in preferences. You just have to be very careful about interpreting welfare, because the consumers are not the same in the two cases. So I think this is a little, well, I can take more questions. We stop at 10:30 anyway, but I'm right at.
If this is a good point to stop,
Okay,
let's stop here.
Excellent, excellent.
I've distributed, so I have two homework sets, two assignments. that
Okay,
are-
perfect.
Have different degrees of difficulty, but they're just basically, you were asking for some stuff to sort of get your hands dirty. And so I've given out two assignments. They're basically the way I learned my best learning for CG was actually replicating other people's results.
Uh-huh.
And so I gave the two starting point models, which is the Miller-Spencer model and the Chauvin-Wally survey article introduction. There's constant returns to scale. They're basically simple. There's very simple CG models. And what I've given you is I've given you the data file. And then if you're a tire biter, that's my brother-in-law went to Harvard Business School. Tire biters are like dogs that chase cars and try to bite their tires because they don't know the car is bigger than they are. If you're a tire biter, you can try to write that model down yourself. And actually, that's also something I tell students, that it's a lot like playing basketball, learning how to shoot free throws. You don't come to the line once and hit the free throw and say that I'm done, right?
Yeah.
So actually, this process of practicing, this is actually a great exercise.
Yeah.
Chauvin-Wally model, get the data, write down the model, replicate the results. You do it once, great. Do it again, do it again, do it again, right?
Yeah.
Where you know what you're doing, that's useful. So one thing I'll do between now, though, and the end of the week is I'll pick out a couple. Jim and I have written several papers together where Jim always insists once we get a big complicated model running, we make a little model that illustrates what's going on. So I have to look through our collection of papers and find one that I can do. So I'll do a couple that are more related. What he's doing today, I realize, is closer to what you guys are interested in, but these, we're getting started with GAMS.
No, this is good.
These
So
guys are good.
which one do we start with here? There's
Either one,
okay.
Miller
doesn't-
Spencer, and there's also the Chauvin, the Miller Spencer paper was the first application of CG in history. It was for studying the decision of the UK government to join the European Union.
Okay.
And then the Chauvin-Wally piece from '84 was a survey of the early work. So they're both relatively elementary models. And it's largely just, there are three parts to the exercise. One is write down the equations. That's the hard part. The second part is write down the reporting code and then try to make sure that it agrees with what you have from the published papers.
Okay, perfect. And for people on the Paul and Natalie put those in the chat for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Okay, we'll continue at 45.
yep, so 20 minutes.
Yeah, and I gotta go up to a meeting.
That's fine. Yeah, that works. This is perfect.